Hello, Patreons, and welcome back to another great Secret Friends Unite Spotlight, where we take the opportunity to talk to, luminaries in the genre world who are kind enough to sit down with us. I am, as always, here with my trusty cohort, Mr. Peter Stein. Peter, good evening.
Hello.
And very, very excited to welcome into the spotlight Mr. Adam Nimoy, author, director, and someone whose ears aren't maybe quite as pointy as I expected. No, he's the great son of Spock actor Leonard Nimoy. Adam, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, just to get the ball rolling, I, got an advance copy of your most recent book. You've written several autobiographies for, basically about your life in general. And I spent about 2 hours really digging into the middle part of it last night, and it's a page turner. And I'm a terrible book reader in my older age. I'm almost 50, and with my ADD, I get so distracted by stuff that sitting down and reading a book can sometimes be challenging. But yours is absolutely fantastic. So I just wanted to first and foremost tell you how much I've been enjoying it. So thank you for that, and
thank you, Charlie, for your kind words.
Oh, you're very welcome. Peter and I host a bi-weekly Star Trek podcast. That's kind of our focus. But we'll definitely talk about a multitude of different things. But just to kind of ease into chatting, so you've been around Star Trek obviously since way before the beginning, due to your dad and just your life in the industry. Just as kind of a soft pedal, tell me about an experience with someone involved with the show, maybe when you were younger, an actor or director. That was just a fond memory.
Well, I was 9 years old when they started production of the show. I don't really, I'm not trying to think about some of my fond memories were, I was very close to a guy named Frank Vinci, who was my dad's stand-in and played an extra on a number of the episodes.
Yeah,
he was a great guy. I really liked him. I just had a very good relationship with Nichelle and with DeForest and George. All very nice people, very welcoming people. Even Bill. I think I got along better with Bill than Leonard did. So, it was just it was a very welcoming kind of a family affair. Even early on, I think people were very happy with the show, happy with the work they were doing, and very welcoming to me.
Gotcha. That's fantastic. I have had a Bill experience a couple of times. I was on the Star Trek cruise with my wife about a year ago, and I stood up and asked a question, and I was foolish enough to mention within my question something about Star Trek The Next Generation, and he kind of flipped out at me on stage, and I just thought it was the greatest, most fun thing that could have possibly happened. He's a delight, depending on how you look at it when you see him on stage. So I enjoy him immensely. I can't lie. So Peter, please.
Hey, I love the guy. I love Bill. I just saw him at Cirque du Soleil about a month ago.
Oh, wow.
In Santa Monica. And, more power to him. He keeps going. He keeps the legacy alive. Bill, I really admire Bill for what he's accomplished.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. Gotcha. Great. No, thank you very much, Peter.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit. One of the things, I wasn't able to read the whole book. I was able to skim parts. But one thing that stuck out to me was the theme about the thread with emotional maturity. And I found that interesting in part because emotion is a large part of what informed the underlying character of Spock from what I've heard from various interviews and things. Would you be able to speak a little bit about that theme in general as a life lesson, and then in particular about in regarding the relationship with your own father?
Well, yeah, I mean, it has a lot to do with 12-step recovery, and which I feel comfortable talking about. I've been in the program for 20 years, and I've learned a lot from the program. The problem is that when you start drinking or using on a regular basis, you're in arrested development. You're not maturing emotionally. And very early on in my recovery, I was at a bookstore that sold AA literature, 12-step literature. And the woman who ran the store told me that I basically had the emotional development of a 17-year-old boy, which is how old I was when I started smoking pot every day.
Wow.
And my first reaction was, that's bullshit, and she doesn't know me, and how can she say that? Which is the typical reaction of a 17-year-old boy. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So a lot of the program of recovery is not just being sober. It's about, learning to grow up and learning the tools of how to deal with difficult situations. And with me, a real problem was when people piss me off, I'm not doing this. I'm doing this,
Yep.
Yes, sir.
and that's the problem. I'm not giving them the Vulcan salute. I'm flipping them off.
Right.
And that's been my challenge in life. That was a lot of my challenge with my dad, and I talk about in the book, and with my teenage daughter and with my ex-wife. I mean, they were very challenging relationships, and I really needed to figure out how to deal with them in a more mature, emotionally mature way. And some of the tools that we use are things like just pausing, taking a minute to calm down, to get grip on your brain before you start saying and doing stuff that you're going to regret later on.
True.
And that's really been something I've been working on for 20 years.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Gotcha. Excellent. Kind of focusing on that as well. I don't, a lot of people don't necessarily know this about me. I have been married twice before. I'm married the third time very happily. And I have 2 adult sons that I do not have a relationship with. And that's a very long story. My son Noah, who's 24, my son Jackson, who's 19. I raised my stepson, who's also 24, and it was a real nightmare of drug addiction, rehab, suicide attempts. We got through it. He's 24 now, and he's thriving. And like any adult man, I've had tough patches with my dad, even though now we're very, very close. But growing up, really not at all. Reading your book, I really was resonated with me how hard you worked to connect with your son and with your daughter. Tell me about what you feel like has been the most rewarding part of that journey, because it takes, I know how much work it takes, and I know how much work it takes for you, reading about, your time in therapy with your daughter and the hot and cold. It's my stepdaughter, who was an adult when my wife and I got together, but she lived with us for a while and definitely dealt with it and watched her grow out of it. She's 30 now and just really living a great life. So what would you say, how old are your children now, if you don't mind my asking?
Well, my daughter Maddie is 34 and Jonah is 32. They're almost exactly 2 years apart.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So what, during the time, that you're going through this, what would you say is kind of a watershed moment of the rewarding part of that journey?
Well, I mean, the real key issue for me was how, can I engage in a more healthy relationship with them than I had with my dad? This is the problem. I'm trying to break this cycle of dysfunction that I had with my dad and not repeat these mistakes with my own kids, because I had a lot of trouble with Leonard, even though I was always proud of him and always reverential towards him based on what he had accomplished and achieved in his life, when the odds were really very much stacked against him. I mean, Leonard was a scrawny Jewish boy from, immigrant parents out of the West End of Boston, and came to Hollywood and really, was on quite a trajectory to fame and stardom that we'd never anticipated. But it was very challenging being his son and relating to him. And as much as we both tried, there was a lot of dysfunction in the relationship, which we finally were able to overcome with the help of 12-step recovery. With my son and daughter, I had a very different situation with them for a number of reasons. Number one, I was born in Southern California, so were they. Number two, I wasn't like Leonard, desperate to survive, and hustle jobs and keep my career going. Yeah. Family was a low priority to my dad. I had a different kind of outlook on things because I could afford to. I had more of an economic foundation. I had more support. I had my career goals. I mean, I went to law school and practiced law, but the family was also very important to me. So I hung out with those kids quite a bit, and I enjoyed hanging out with them. So we had a love connection to begin with, and I just did a lot of stuff with those guys. I mean, I was coaching Maddie's soccer team and taking her to cello lessons and her tutors. And with Jonah, I was jamming with him. I played guitar. He played drums. I was taking him to kung fu lessons. I was taking him to his drum lessons. I was dumb enough to wake up at 5 a.m. to take him and his buddies surfing out in Malibu. And despite, I did everything for those guys because I enjoyed doing it. But despite all that, they still found reasons to hate me.
Oh yeah, I know.
And I made my own mistakes. So it's just part of the plan. But with them, at least, I had a love connection, and I showed up for them.
Yeah.
And we were able to overcome a lot of this stuff that I could simply not do with my own father.
Yeah. Wow. It was heartening to read, and like I said, my hope for reunification and recovery with my two adult sons. It's something that I dream about. I just haven't really gotten to a place where I can put it into motion. But I live in hope, and reading your book gives me a lot of hope. So I really.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlie. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Peter.
One of the things that I found kind of fun was throughout the book we see examples of your and your father's Jewish heritage. I learned the real definitions of some Yiddish words that my family uses all the time. That was kind of fun. So it's even one of the reasons you were here in Michigan earlier this month was presenting to a Jewish literary group. I was curious if you'd be able to say anything about how that came into play, if it did, into both your and your father's recovery and all of the working together parts.
Well, yeah, on a number of levels. The Jewish tradition has been very important to our family. My dad heavily identifies with his Jewish roots, and we talk a lot about the fact that the "Live Long and Prosper" salute is derived from the Hebrew letter Shin, which stands for Shaddai, the Almighty, or another name for God, and that he borrowed that from the rabbis when he was attending services in the West End of Boston as a kid. And we talk about the fact that Judaism has really interlaced our lives in large part. Bill Shatner and Leonard Nimoy are basically just two Jewish boys running around the galaxy in Star Trek together. And then a big part of my dad's whole heritage is that my grandparents were Russian immigrants. They lived in a small village in Ukraine, but they considered themselves Russian. And like a lot of our Jewish tradition, our Jewish history, they had to leave their home because of violence against them. So that's an interwoven part of that. But the other thing that I really focused on in terms of Jewish tradition and my relationship with my dad is that the fact that the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the founders of our religion, all had trouble with one another. They were all fathers and sons, and there was a lot of dysfunction in those relationships. And that was, all that went on 4,000 years ago. So the central question of my book is what can be done about it? What's a Jewish boy to do? What's anybody to do when you have this intergenerational conflict and trauma going on? How do you stop it? And I didn't know what to do. I had no clue. I just knew that we were in it, and I felt like, are we just doomed to repeat the past? And luckily for me, and that I found 12-step recovery, which enabled me to find the tools I needed to work with my dad and make an amends to my dad. And lucky for me, also, my dad was also willing to let go of the past, let go of his resentments towards me, and move on in a loving way with our relationship. So we got real lucky. I think we're trying to break the cycle, and I think it's a success story for me and my dad. It's not for everybody, and it doesn't, it's not just the fame that came with it complicated things a little bit. Try arguing with a pop culture icon who's loved by fans, millions of fans all over this planet. It's very difficult. But a lot of families deal with this kind of dysfunction. Charlie, you were just talking about it. That's the point of the book. It's just a family story. It's a father-son story at its heart.
True that. Wow. Yeah, powerful stuff. All right. Well, switch gears again, and let's talk about Star Trek. I can't help myself. Peter and I, for our podcast, are actually talking about Star Trek: The Next Generation right now. We're in season 6, and you directed two episodes in season 6, one of which we talked about recently, Rascals, and the other one was Timescape, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks, which I enjoyed both of them for different reasons. So before you're a heavy-duty director back in that day, and it's something your book said you directed, I believe, over 45 hours of television. In that period, were you a fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation? Did you watch it at all prior to that, or tell me about kind of any recollections from doing those episodes?
Well, I had trouble getting into it at first. I tried to give it a shot, but it was a very different show then, And it's, again, to my father's credit, he helped me make this transition into TV directing because I wanted to get out of practicing law. I just couldn't see myself doing it for the rest of my life. It was just really challenging for me, and I wanted to feel good about going to work. So I got the bug, and I started thinking about transitioning and started taking classes. And my dad started, introducing me to people, including Rick Berman, executive producer of The Next Generation. And, Rick's condition was sort of that I had to sit around and observe for season 5, almost the entire thing. So I'm reading scripts and watching them shoot that show for that entire season before he would even give me an episode.
Wow.
And that's when I really came to love the show, because they were really finding their voice, and by then, and
right.
The writing was stupendous. The cast knew their characters very well, and they interplayed with one another. They got along. They really seemed to be. It was a real ensemble effort on their behalf. I learned a lot by watching them. I befriended those people. They were very welcoming to me. And that's when I really became a devotee of the show.
Yeah. Season 5 was actually, I was 11 when the show came on. I was in 6th grade, and it wasn't until that 5th season that it really clicked with me that I became a super fan. So it's interesting you say that was your indoctrination, because you were there every day watching them shoot, and then it finally clicked with me that I started watching on a weekly basis. So that's interesting. So. Well, cool.
I was not aware of it when it was airing.
Yeah. You were 2, I think, at that point. Peter's a young man.
Yep. So, in a similar vein, you directed the Deep Space Nine documentary, What You Leave Behind, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And the notes that I saw was that you were inspired to do so because of the passion of the fans that you saw for that show. So what was it like getting into the details after the fact, obviously, but the details with that cast and that show, as opposed to like being on the set behind the scenes in Next Generation and then experiencing some of that with your dad on the original series?
Well, Peter, I didn't end up directing the Deep Space Nine, What We Left Behind. I moved on from that show. Yeah. And Dave Zappone took over, and Ira Stephen Bear took over because they were much more in tune with what was going on in that show, and they were much more qualified to be putting that documentary together. I mean, I love the show. I observed on that show for a bit too. I was hoping to direct an episode of that. Great cast, great characters, excellent writing, excellent directors.
So good.
I wished I had done more with that show, but Star Trek was I was very lucky, and it was really about Rick Berman giving me a lot of leeway to hang out there and learn the craft of what directing was all about. I mean, the Next Generation shows were very challenging for me. They're really my first 2 shows, and I did not have my act together by then. I mean, I was just getting my sea legs, and some of it was a big learning curve, definitely a big learning curve. And by then, season 6, the cast knows what they're doing, and it has a rhythm. It's a fast moving train. All these shows are, and you've got to figure out how to jump aboard that train, and take the ride. And a couple of times I walked in front of that train and got hit by it. So, it was really after that, when I got to The Outer Limits, which I directed with my dad starring in it, that I really found that was my 3rd episode of TV, that I really started to find my sea legs, my TV directing legs. And again, with a large part with the help of my dad, we talked a lot about how to break down the script and what the show is about, what's the theme, and how to talk to actors, frankly, which is a big part of my job.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So I don't put my foot in my mouth again. Did you direct episodes of Babylon 5? Because I read that, but I just want to make sure I'm not tripping that up again.
Yeah, no, I did. I did. That was another great opportunity. A fabulous show, great cast, a lot of fun, very different parameters, much tighter budget. They didn't go extra hours. They didn't go overtime. They pulled the plug on you. So you really had to have your,
wow.
Yeah. It was but it's, it disciplines you. It really does. It makes you just have to work with what you have. And I was a little nervous about doing that show for that reason. And my dad said, take the show. You're going to learn something about your craft, or you're going to meet somebody who's going to help you with your career. And I learned a lot about just the efficiency of working and being prepared and making those hours, and cramming it all into 12 hours and being realistic about what we could and could not do and anticipating problems, which is a big part of what directing is all about. That was a great experience. I'm really glad that, I was invited to be there and then I had the opportunity to do it.
Awesome.
Excellent. Very good. Peter's outfit reminds me, one of the recent interviews that we did was Nicholas Meyer, and what a great guy. You guys have a relationship as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Nick is like finding a crazy long lost uncle. I love it. I mean, Nick's a real character and a big inspiration in my life, and we kind of found each other over the last couple of years. I just love the guy. I love him for a lot of reasons. He's very inspirational in terms of the work that he's the output and the quality and the writing. And, as a writer, he's very inspirational to me. I've read all his Sherlock Holmes stuff, which I just love. Yeah. And he's been like, he wants to play the role of the lost uncle. He's so kind and loving and inviting and warm. And we talk about my dad. My dad and Nick had a very complicated relationship. They butted heads plenty, but my dad had a lot of respect for Nick, and which is why he was all for it when Nick came on to direct Star Trek VI, write and direct it. He knew he could do it on time and on budget. So, Nick was the guy, and Nick had a lot of great, of course, Star Trek II, without Wrath of Khan, they may never have gotten back on track. Right. With the motion pictures, because the structure of the motion picture was not really up to par with the series.
I've always had mixed feelings about that movie myself. There are things that I like the ship itself. That Enterprise design will always be my favorite, and I'm very well versed in all things Star Trek. But it was a huge success for Paramount, as I understand it. It was a huge moneymaker. But you're right. Some ways, kind of a hollow victory, because you look at what followed and all the other great storytelling that Star Trek did, and then there's the motion picture, and people just like to pile on it. But it accomplished some things, but it definitely fell short in other ways. There's
exactly. But Nick got everything back on track, and I think that it was a monumental feat that he basically saved the franchise. That's just my opinion. I think a lot of other people share. I love Wrath of Khan.
I can't disagree. All right, I'm going to wrap it up with one last question. That's going to be a two-part question that I just kind of thought about it because it's a part of your book I read last night. Living in L.A., and being other musicians who are from LA, you described a chapter in there, or a verse in there, where you were at a Jackson Browne concert, and I just adore Jackson Browne. He's an LA guy too. How many times have you seen him in concert?
I can't even count. Charlie. I so many different times. It just coincidentally happens that my ex-wife Nancy has been cohabitating with the bass player in Jackson's band. Who's a good friend of mine, Bob Glaub, who's like a legend in the industry. He's been on a lot of records and on a lot of tours, and I just love the guy because we talk music all the time. And when they play in town, we go to see them because I go to see Bob. He's just a phenomenal bass player. So and I've been at parties where and I've talked to Jackson on a number of occasions because of that connection. So
oh my God.
He's a great guy. He's just a great talent. And Jonah played, my son Jonah, who plays music, played a couple of benefits with Jackson for the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District to raise money. Jackson's very socially conscious and aware and connected and supportive. So we have him to thank for that. And then also, my son Jonah is in a small punk band out of Orange County, California called The Offspring. So that's also, been a big, actually, they're a huge band out of Orange County, California.
Absolutely.
Yeah. At this moment, they're in Australia. He's traveled the world with those guys. So, music has been a big part of my life, and it started with the Fab Four. My sister and I saw them at the Hollywood Bowl.
Oh my gosh.
Then my mother took the family, my mom and dad and my sister and I went to see Cream Farewell concert in 1968. So music has been a big part of my life. Jackson had a big impact on me during my my freshman year in college. Late for the Sky came out. It's just before Running on Empty. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, love it all, man. Love it.
I have a framed copy of Running on Empty in the upstairs in my house, and I named my son after Jackson Brown, so I'm a bit of a fan. Wow. And then, okay, now here's one that came from the very beginning of your book, and this goes outside of my love of Star Trek. You mentioned the couple of times that your dad took you to the small bookstore in the neighborhood, and you dropped that your favorite comic book was The Amazing Spider-Man. That has always been my favorite comic book, and I read to this day. I'm very proud to say that thanks to digital comics, I've read every issue, almost 950 issues of that comic. When was the last time you picked one up? I mean, and do you have any recollections of like, my God, what a great story this was back in 1965?
Well, I was just going through my collection. I collected from roughly 1963 to 1971.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I still have a number of those issues, and I was just looking them over.
Oh,
I mean,
funny.
look, there's it's no coincidence that Peter Parker and Mr. Spock shared a lot of common traits.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
The outsider, the loner, struggling with emotions, struggling with family, with girlfriends, with a career, with supervillains. I mean,
right.
I just love Peter Parker. I just identify with the guy, and he just came at the right time because this is the golden age of Marvel, really, which started to take off in the '60s.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Batman and Detective Comics and Superman. I mean, I love that stuff too. But then we were branching out to other things. We wanted something new and different. So there was the Flash and Green Lantern and the Atom and all these guys. But then came Marvel with Silver Surfer and Fantastic Four and Thor and
Avengers,
and Daredevil and Amazing Spider-Man. It just I kept coming back to him over and over again. I still do.
I hear you. No, that's awesome. Yeah, it's kind of an offbeat question, I will admit. Well, Nick, this has been absolutely incredible. I have loved talking to you. Your book has meant a lot to me. Most Human is available online in bookstores absolutely everywhere. Nick, you're on a book tour right now. This episode will drop within the next couple of weeks. For our listeners that are out there, where can people find you, not only in the real world, but even online?
Well, they can find me online at adamnimoy.com. I have a website, and all my social handles are there, and my schedule of stuff coming up is there. I'm on a book tour now. I'm going to be I'm here in New York. I have some dates here that are happening, and over the next 3 months, I'm going to be all over the country.
Oh, fantastic. Wow. This has been absolutely wonderful. So again, thank you for your time. And thank you, our Patreons, for listening. As always, if you're listening to this on our free feed, if you visit patreon.com/Secret Friends Unite, you can get all of our great bonus conversations like this one and our conversation with Nicholas Meyer and a lot of the other stuff we do. But until then, friends, we'll see you soon. Adam, thank you one more time.
Peter, Charlie, live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.
This podcast is part of the Secret Friends Unite podcasting network, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast services around the galaxy, as well as video on our YouTube channel. You can support Secret Friends Unite by becoming a Patreon member, get bonus programs and more over at patreon.com/Secret Friends Unite. Join our Discord community for even more discussions on all things geek. For all the latest updates on Secret Friends Unite, make sure to follow us on Threads at secret.friends.unite and visit secretfriendsunite.com. Find our merchandise at TeePublic and Redbubble. Thanks for listening, and may the Force live long and prosper.